It's one last job, Harding. One last job, and you're out.
Pull your agents back, Birkin.
Harding? Harding!
Motherfuckers wanna make a scene. Cigarette up forehead, keep something. Gotta sound like in the basement. Just like the pirates with the confidence around. Turn on lights, make the stage is set. Blood is warm and my face is wet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Insider Gaming. Mike Straw, Senior Editor here, and I'm pleased to be joined for the second time in as many years, the head of Strange Scaffold, Xalavier Nelson Jr. Xalavier, thank you so much, first off, for joining me here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we get into the next game on the list, I need to bring up the fact that I Am Your Beast is going to be the third game released in 2024. The fifth game released from Strange Scaffold in 2 years. Where's this time coming from? Because I'm dumbfounded. Shocked. I don't get it. How a studio, no matter the size, but how a smaller studio can find all this time to build these games and pump out not just games, but quality games.
It's just different priorities. I remember when a game studio, even say From Software, would launch 1, 2, 3 games a year. Activision, if you look back 10 years back in, or even at this point, 20 years back to like 2004, Activision would publish something like 20, 30 games in a year. Now, they update their live service games and they might have 1 or 2. And those changes in how we release and make games and the priorities we have along the way, a single game, partially because it keeps getting updated, has to generate more revenue, which means more microtransactions for players, which means more exploitative game loops that get you caught up in this being the one game you play. All those things have an impact on the developers, but very much also the player experience. When you change the process, you change the project. And Strange Scaffold, we're just trying to provide people with the next game they didn't know they needed. And those priorities, those very player-centric thing of, you didn't know you needed a dark fantasy horror kidnapping sim. So here it is. Here's an open world comedy adventure game entirely stocked by stock photos that makes most of the people who play it cry. Here's a game that brings back Max Payne, because we haven't done that. We're bringing back the Boomer Shooter, which is great, but no one's bringing back Max Payne. No one's bringing back those classic third-person shooters. We make games in a different way, which lets us explore games with different priorities and bring new things to the table. So clickholding into I Am Your Beast is one of the clearest, I think, examples of when we release I Am Your Beast, we'll have released 15 games in 5 years. And it's just because we want to make sure that players are seeing something new and exciting on a consistent basis. And even if it makes less money than a Fortnite, knowing that at this point we're one of a smaller group of people exploring that territory means that we kind of have to do it. Otherwise, the medium of art and experiences that I love becomes more and more like cash machines in digital form.
You brought up like clickholding, and that game came out of nowhere to everybody. Like, you're just one day, oh, by the way, check this out. It's suspenseful, and all you're doing is counting as fast as you can. Like, how do you come up with these premises of, because it seems every game that the studio releases is different. And it's got a completely different feel. Like El Paso Elsewhere, to this day, is still a game, like, it brings back that old feeling of the PS2 era, but it's something I've never experienced. And, like, personally, it was one of my games of the year last year. Like, it was just a fantastic game that, like, I'll sit there, I'll play on the Steam Deck, I'll play on here. I kind of want my 6-year-old to play, but not yet. I don't know, because he's scared of a lot, and I don't want to, like, scar him at such a young age.
When I was 5 years old, I saw Berserk and Akira, and it's why I'm here today. So let your 6-year-old play.
Maybe it inspires him, right?
Elsewhere. Yeah. But he'll become the next future sensation indie developer.
how do all these concepts just come about? I mean, you again, they're all different. They're so out there in many different ways. Is it all from your brain, or is it all from, like, do you have, like, just your team just constantly thinking of new ways to entertain, I guess?
At this point, it's mostly my brain, although something I really believe in is making sure that the way the game is developed allows a lot of other people to bring their voices into it to make it better than the sum of its parts. A lot of the best pieces of El Paso Elsewhere is because a level designer, inspired by the vision and direction of the game, did something weird, or Romero Bonacausen, the primary programming design collaborator I had on the project, said, "Hey, can we do this?" That's where the wall bounce came from. He was like, "Hey, I found a bug, but I want to keep it. Is this okay?" And he jumped and he bounced off of a nearby wall because of a change we had made in the movement code. So he had basically found a way to basically do a double jump with a combat dive, getting more air to take down enemies while you're falling in slow motion. I said, "No, that's it. That's it. That's in." And that's where I think authorship, there's a lot of discussion that's happened around it in film and in games. I think that's where authorship can be at its best, is when it can provide something so strong that it facilitates other people to do things. But yeah, the ideas do mainly come from my head, and a lot of it is saying both what is a thing that can be made, yes, but also what makes it make sense.
Yeah.
Because a game like Clickholding, unless it has a very specific scope and efficiency of design, it doesn't make sense to make it. No one is coming into 2024 saying one of the sensational horror games of the summer is going to be the game where you click for a guy in a click chair.
Who just stares at you, and for some reason doesn't say anything, but he's terrifying. Like, just the eyes alone are enough to, like, I remember when you dropped the trailer, just looking at the eyes, I'm like, I'm done. Nope, done. Like, I'm very skittish with things. Like, I'll play them or watch them, but I'm very easily startled. And just that messed with my head.
Yeah, and the idea that regardless of that specter, if it was haunting my nightmares, I wouldn't make a game about that character or that world unless I also knew exactly what we were trying to accomplish with it and how it provided value to a player's life. I think it's why Strange Scaffold stands out, because there's people who make games very quickly. There's a lot of people who make really high quality games, but the fact that we're saying, hey, efficiency and quality are not opposing sides of the spectrum. They are just one. They can be taken as one way to facilitate making experiences you never could otherwise. It's something that means a space warlord organ trading simulator gets made in the first place, because if you're just looking for how to maximize profit or what's selling right now, you don't have the tools to find your player's next favorite game, which is one of the interesting things about how our ultimate set of partnerships came about for that game. Was we had pitched Space Warlord to a lot of people, and everyone either stalled the conversation or was just like, I'm not sure about this. Then we did our own reveal trailer, and because we were like, you know what, we're not gonna wait for the rest of the industry to catch up to us. We did it for Dog Airport Game. We were talking about development from the beginning, and so for Space Warlord, we tried to go dark and do things the right way. It didn't do anything special, so we were like, screw it. We aren't going to let the rest of the industry, especially since we can finish it under our own power, we're going to let them determine whether or not this game gets made. And we put our own announcement trailer, and suddenly all those people are writing back. And we end up eventually on things like Game Pass, but only after we had kind of stepped out front and proved this is a game that deserves to get made. Oh, you feel weird about organs? Oh no, how will players not like that? You have to show it to them in the first place. We are, as an industry, in a place where people are terrified to even give players something to like, let alone dislike.
Yeah.
What if it's not like Lethal Company? What if it's not like Civilization? What if it's not like Chained Together, or whatever is the current du jour of the industry? So yeah, I give a lot of props to my fellow developers, and I think there's a lot of amazing work still being done in the medium. It is, contrary to what some commentators might say, it's not a hotbed of exploitation, even for projects with really messed up microtransaction models. There's a lot of developers who love players who are doing good work on those projects and trying to do their little part to make experiences better. But Strange Scaffold, we have managed to carve out a place for ourselves where we work so efficiently that the rest of the industry can't tell us no. And I'm very thankful for that, because we kind of ended up here by accident.
And you're making all these games, and you're saying, well, we don't know. Making games, you're not giving people a chance to like or dislike a lot of these places. And that goes into making all these different types of games. And now we'll get to I Am Your Beast, which is the demo on Steam Next Fest picked up so much steam with speedrunning. I played it a lot. It was one of those games like I couldn't get enough of. Like, there are a few games. I think there was like 5 or 6 games on Next Fest I couldn't get enough of. It was I Am Your Beast. It was Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers, because any roguelike with poker, like Balatro might be my game of the year, I don't know. I have put too much into that game where I have lost work hours. Like, it's affected me. Like, because it's poker, and that's like that type of stuff. But I Am Your Beast, this first person shooter, it's just something that you guys haven't done, with the idea of a secret agent gets called back for, that one job, he denies it, and now everybody's on him. What was maybe, I guess, the inspiration behind it? What came to it to decide, you know what, first person shooter, fine, but the over the topness of just the action that you get in I Am Your Beast, what went into that planning or that design?
A lot of it was, again, kind of seeing gaps where the rest of the industry was either not following down a path or determined that a path wasn't worth following anymore, like things like Max Payne and Dead to Rights and the Die Hard trilogy on PS1 for the real OGs out there. And for I Am Your Beast, it was looking at, okay, a lot of people are going into this tactical space, that kind of Tom Clancy, early 2000s era, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon space, and satisfying the nostalgia there. But that's kind of where the conversation and the thought process stops. We have a lot of games that are emerging that are following down the same paths, and the paths are cool, and they're doing something unique for it, and they're satisfying players. But there's nothing new being explored there. They're not saying, you loved Ghost Recon, here's what comes next. And the idea of comic book Doom guy in a Tom Clancy setting, what happens when you have someone who can jump, kick people so hard their heads explode when greeted with what would otherwise be a kind of po-faced military combat gameplay space. It was something that was deeply enticing. Even going back to the efficiency of it all, saying, hey, if it's all happening in a bit of an Arctic tundra, then that means that we can reuse a lot of things, because It's all just covered in snow. You can reuse levels and level concepts, and you can pull really interesting things about this. We have a level that's called Burning Crescent, which is basically a giant pit, and in the center is this sniper tower that's overlooking you at a bunch of different points, and you're bouncing around between points of cover while taking out enemies as quickly as possible. And right before you hit the finish, there's a point where you can veer off and get a lower level time, but you can take out that gosh dang sniper who's been harassing you for the entire level, even though it's only been roughly 30 seconds. And that idea of very instant catharsis and pursuit, and again, frenetic things applied to a tactical military setting that could very easily just be overdone or bland. That's where we live. We don't just make the game you've seen before. We say, what can we provide inside of that same space? If we're doing a Max Payne, if that's noir, what does that look like when it's neo-noir? What does it look like when we're playing sick hip-hop beats over you shooting a werewolf in slow motion? And we didn't expect it to do as well as it did. We knew we had made a good thing, but partially just out of realism, we never believe anything will be a hit before it happens. So seeing the wildly enthusiastic response to it, and knowing that you don't get to an I Am Your Beast without throwing out a lot of stuff in the process and doing those games justice too, it's just made us more confident in our approach of saying, hey, regardless of how well I Am Your Beast does, we're not going to make it a slot machine 3 years from now.
Yeah.
You know that within 6 to 9 months, you're going to have another Strange Scaffold game that's going to give you another thing you didn't know you needed.
And with I Am Your Beast, I mean, it's fully voiced, a fully voiced story, 20 plus levels, but it's still going to be, even though it's fully voiced, it's still going to be just a frantic experience. The idea of finding that balance between the story and the frantic gameplay, that again, they're going to expect some people when they play a story driven or anything with a story that there's going to be moments to let it sink in and sit. And how with something as over the top, I don't want to keep saying over the top, something as, I guess, chaotic as what I Am Your Beast is, how does that blend with that story narrative and being able to let people actually understand the story that's going on here?
I think something that we've lost consideration of in games is how that we see quality as just like a linear trajectory. It's just a straight arrow going up. If you have a cutscene, and then you have photorealistic characters in the cutscene, and each like little notch up, the game just gets better. I think over time we've lost or really never had the vocabulary to understand when you use different tools, you get to have a different impact. So El Paso Elsewhere thrives because it has really cinematic cutscenes. We have over 40 minutes of fully voiced, fully animated, lush cutscenes that immerse you in this world and in this character. Mm-hmm. And I Am Your Beast, we went with a kinetic text style for the cutscenes. So if you've ever seen a video on YouTube of either a comedic or a dramatic thing where words are coming in and slamming into the screen and coming in different arrangements with different backgrounds. In traditional games industry terms, it's like, oh, that's a downgrade from El Paso Elsewhere's cutscenes because you don't have 3D characters in a space. But because you don't have visuals, you just have words and audio, your brain stays locked into the space of the previous level you're in. You're still angry, you're still ready to fuck a dude up, and you have nothing pulling you out of that flow visually until you go into the next level, and you're right back into it again. And the idea that every game, every single thing in a game is an opportunity to say, does this pull focus where it needs to be? Does this give the player a better experience? Does this give the player a space to either rest, if rest is required, or to get amplified if what you need to do is turn them up a notch? I think the lack of really intentional discussion of how those tools come to be and how we use them is part of why we've ended up right now in a time where we have the most expensive games that have ever been made.
Yeah.
And people might not care about the entire thing. They might only care about 10% of that thing. And the idea that you can have a game that costs $500 million and players care about 5% of it because all of those tools are not angled towards a very specific purpose to do and say something and give the player something really specific. I think it is a source of dissonance that I really want to see confronted, because I want every game I play to hit me as hard as humanly possible in the way it's trying to hit me. And when we as an industry see the only things that determine quality to be, is it going up that bar of fidelity? Can you see the cloth move on a character's body? Then we also lose the ability to even ask for the things that will give us a better experience. So every game at Strange Scaffold, we're saying, where do we pull back on scope or fidelity because it makes the game better?
Yeah.
Where do we put time and energy? And sometimes weeks of focus to pull off something really special that gets the ability to be highlighted because it is the star of the experience.
How difficult can that be to make sure that everything that you guys are building for a specific game stays on that trajectory to where everything matters, right? Like obviously there's times where there's something in a game it doesn't work. It has to go. And like no game has something that everything that was thought of is in there from the beginning. But how difficult is it when it comes to like just finding and making sure, well, everything has to go. All right, this just happened 10 seconds ago. What happens in this little cutscene, in this dialogue, needs to connect what just happened to what you're about to do. But it has to keep going for an entire experience. There can't be any lulls, like you said, because then, and at the end of the day, the way people are, if it hits one point of a game, part of a game where that doesn't connect or they don't care, there's a chance they just turn it off and don't finish. So it's always trying to find that. So how do you go through that whole process of, did this work? No. Let's try again. Did this work? Yes. Next step.
I think it is having, to a degree, the luxury as a team to say that we're going to have a focus. It's part of the reason why we've struggled so much with getting funding in the past, is we come to, say, a publisher and we say, hey, here's the game and here's where it's going to be focused. And here's other pieces in the game that are important, and they're all going to work towards this. And in fact, because there's less going towards them, we can make that focus brighter, but we aren't going to kill ourselves to put money or time into a place where it isn't going to directly benefit the player's experience. Publishers get really leery of that perspective. Of focus. They see games not as a space of where you can give players something, but as a space to avoid something that will make a player angry. It's like, oh, what if players are upset that you don't see the characters in 3D who are talking? It's like, well, what you get to instead have is an audio drama, which has an entirely different effect, which supports this and this and this. And they're like, oh, but I don't know. So a lot of people passed on I Am Your Beast. Everyone, actually. And it was Frosty Pop who looked at what we were doing there, and the game had actually been canceled twice internally. The first time because we didn't have the bandwidth, we were focusing on other projects, and the second time because we needed to make sure the studio survived to ship El Paso elsewhere. It was Frosty Pop who resurrected it and said, we know that you make games that matter, and games that make choices, and games that hit players. I think that this will make a splash. So that game got to exist, but like that type of focus, the type of focus that results in games like Kunitsugami recently, where it's like, man, this is like a PS2 experience. It only has the budget in the places where the game needs it. It's wild that that's the place where games exists in 2024. It's kind of like the old era of games back in the Xbox 360 era, where people were shoving in multiplayer on every game because they were forced to.
Yeah.
Even if it detracted from or pulled resources from the single player experience, and it wasn't the intention of the project, and it resulted in a lot of dead servers. We're kind of there now, but specifically in the sense of, oh man, if you don't have X or Y or Z, if you don't have Steam trading cards ready at launch, then players won't care. They won't love the game. We question that assumption, and we've been very thankful to find players going with us on that journey.
To see this growing, obviously something's going right. What do you think, I guess, to narrow it down, what do you think is going the most right, I guess, for getting this growth to continue and people to buy into what you're doing? Because you aren't making something traditionally with anything you guys do. You aren't developing games in a traditional sense. And by traditional, I mean what the industry is now, right? You aren't developing games. You aren't like sticking in your lane on, you are this type of studio. You aren't releasing these 10, 15, 20 hour long games that even some indie studios do. Your games are built to be digestible while also telling a compelling story. But
thank you.
And the growth, just what would you say is the biggest factor to that growth? And it goes right back. I got off because then I started thinking about everything that that your studio has been able to do. But the idea of just that growth from the game over game over game, what do you think has been the biggest factor to that?
I mean, I think there's the grace of God, of course, but there's also the fact that it was intentional. We apply game design to games, and we're really good as an industry at doing that at this point. We know that if you adjust a piece of even, say, the color of a UI element, then it will change the player's experience, but we just don't apply that to production cycles. So from the beginning, what I was telling people who even joined the studio or prospective publishers was Strange Scaffold doesn't want to sell people one game. We want to sell them 5. We want to be presenting the type of artistic approach they can get behind, like their favorite director and musician, where even if you don't love the latest Martin Scorsese film, you probably go and see it because it's a Martin Scorsese film. You want to see what he has to say next. Yeah. And in games, we don't consider the individual voices of creators often to be worthy of that value prioritization. We say, oh, it's a new Kratos game, but we try to, in the process, even if we aren't trying to, we somewhat say it's a new Kratos game, not the next game from this person and their creative perspective that you've already fallen in love with before.
Yeah.
So, again, at Strange Scaffold, something we did very intentionally. Our game design was, we're going to give you more experiences. We're going to give you something that you care about. We're going to do it quickly enough that even if you don't like one individual game, the next game is around the corner. So the Strange Scaffold collection now on Steam of like 7-8 video games that all have that perspective. Every Steam sale, or even outside of Steam sales, people find one game like Clickholding, which is $3, and they buy the $100 collection. And that's in capitalism terms, that's what keeps the studio afloat. And we built it that way. And you can, and most people do, build your studio around blockbusters. 3 years from now, 5 years from now, we're going to have the biggest game of all time. I don't want to do that, so I don't.
Is it a case of, as we start to wind down here, is it a case of you just don't want to, you want to make sure no one forgets the name Strange Scaffolding? Like they want, like, because is there that worry maybe if you take too long to put out a game, like people just might forget about the studio? Or is that not even in your mind?
It's not so much driven by fear. It is more so driven by mortality, if we want to get down to the core reasonings here. I am going to die one day. And if I have a choice between making one perfect game, even though we know perfection does not exist, in this world at least, if I have the choice between spending 10 years making my magnum opus, or 10 years making 30 buck wild things that would never exist otherwise, I'd rather do the second one. Yeah. And there's some people who would only rather do the first. And one of the things I tell people when they're trying to start a studio or when we're talking about building a new project is know yourself. I know because, among other things, I worked on Hypnospace Outlaw. That was like a 5-6 year game. I was only on there for 2.5, 3 years of it. But it was still a rough time, and we come sprinting to the finish line, and we're wiped out and exhausted, and we are at the total mercy of this one day will determine whether we get to keep making video games. How do the rest of our lives go?
Right.
And I was like, I don't want to do that again. It was so great to see the response to Hypnospace Outlaw, that people did find value in what we had done. But one other flip of the coin, and Hypnospace Outlaw is one of dozens, hundreds of stunning indie and AA and AAA games that just falls through the murk. So I don't want to be at risk. I want to provide for my family, and I want to say more in the limited time that I have on this earth.
With trying to think of the best way to transition on this one, we'll go with I Am Your Beast.
Speaking of death.
Yeah, speaking of death, let's blow people up and destroy their limbs with a kick to the back.
Yes.
There we go. That was what you brought up, the bug conversation. Was this a bug that turned into something you kept, or was this something that was you were just like, let's see if this works?
No,
If people who are tuning in and listening and don't know, the day we're recording it, you made a post, or not the day of, a couple days prior, but I saw it today because I was offline all weekend. You can cut seconds off your times, and I'm your beast by stealthily kicking dudes in the back so hard their limbs explode. Was that always in? Was that something that was just added? Was that a bug that was found and you kept? How?
So the thing about the game is we originally thought of it as being kind of Batman Arkham, out of stealth, into stealth, out of stealth again. And as we developed the game, Dan Pierce in particular, my primary programming and design collaborator on the game, as well as Jim Brown and Kevin Ribeiro, our level designers, were just finding that was a really weird flow, and that the game felt best when you just went fast and you killed things.
Yeah.
When you were just burning through your opponent, that is where the game really came alive, and its improvisational kind of gleefully dark comedy brutality. That is where it really came alive, and it happened more when you had, say, a moment of preparation, and then when you go loud, you're only going loud. This is not a stealth game. This is a covert revenge thriller FPS. It is a he's in the walls style fantasy. You move faster than your opponents. You are smarter. You are stronger. And there's a lot of them. Bad odds on their side.
Yeah.
So stealth kills, because of the resources we had, like takedowns, that isn't in the scope of our budget. So we didn't even think about it. It's also going to take valuable time having an animation play out. So we said we aren't going to do that. What we do have is a kick at any time. So I come back to work one day, and I'm just testing the build one day, and I kick a dude in the back, his limbs explode, and I see backbreaker kill. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, oh yeah. Dan's like, yeah, I added that yesterday. I was like, that's great. We have stealth kicks now. I'll be doing posts about this preview for those watching if I haven't done it already by the time this goes out. But bear traps are in the game. Claymores are in the game. And originally, again, in that type of more early vision process of popping in and out of stealth, there was the whole idea of setting traps. If you're moving at 900 miles an hour, you don't have time to set traps. So you just end up with an additional button on your UI where, especially for levels where you're trying to survive, you can set traps. But also, you can just tap a button and it hurls a bear trap at a guy's head at Mach 3, and it snaps on his head and blood flies everywhere, and he falls to the ground, and you just keep moving. And the fact that you can't hurl a bear trap at a guy's head in more video games is evidence of this industry's cowardice.
Yeah.
So,
Right? No one wants these innovations. These are the innovations.
Yep.
The thing is, it's something nobody would think about, right? Like, no one would think about, like, let me kick this guy in the back, and his limbs fall. Like, he just he explodes. Like, it wasn't caused by a bomb. It was caused by your boot. Like,
and that was all coming from art is facilitated by constraints. It's like we don't have additional time or money or space without crunching people or crunching them even more to having a stealth takedown system. It also doesn't fit the game. What we do have is your boot. If we use the tool we have, we can make something even cooler.
yeah.
So now you can also use it outside of stealth. If you just happen to get behind a guy and he happens to have his back turned to you, you get a backbreaker kill. Even that feature where you cut time off your level time by doing kills, I was against it for most of the dev cycle. I said that there isn't a precedent for it. I am not sure that this imbalances what we've created and turns it into a different type of game. I think it will be really hard to balance. It was, I think, the weekend before Steam Next Fest. The team really pitched it hard, and I ended up supporting that. And then it goes bananas, and it results in so much more fluidity and expression in play styles everyone else was right. I was wrong. And that idea of having a game dev cycle where we can have a very set idea of what we're doing, but then color within the lines that we have to build something. That's how creativity works in almost every other industry.
The fact that a creative director of a game just said he was wrong about something and listened to I mean, that alone, obviously I've done this for years. You've been around this industry for years. You know people. I know people. It's not really that common to hear.
But it's what results in better games.
Yeah.
So I tried.
And it seems based on it to be working because the hype around I'm Your Beast launching, it launches on August 15th. Which, happy birthday to me. It just so happens I know what I'm doing on my birthday. So
happy birthday.
I saw that. I looked at the game. Like, I don't care for my birthday too much, but when things I'm looking forward to, like, launch on my birthday, or like I'm going to see Blink-182 on my birthday. Okay, fantastic. Again, these little things. I'm just like, great. Now I have a game to play while I'm sitting in a hotel. Like, but you have this game that everybody seems to be loving. What is your, as the last question here, what is the feature in I'm Your Beast that either you love the most or you think players will love the most when they load it up for the first time?
I really think the feature that I'm most excited about, the thing I geek out about when I play other games as well, and this even goes back to before I was a game developer, was when artistic quality and efficiency meet in the middle, and two things work together to provide something that never could have resulted without either one. I love those kinetic text cutscenes so much because they're the exact type of thing that this industry, as it currently exists, would say is not enough. This doesn't tell the story. This doesn't tell the story well for players. This isn't stylish. This isn't whatever is the intention behind it. This is not up to par, is the thing I have heard and the thing that I have seen this industry say to all sorts of similar solutions over time. And having the audience so joyously react to that. Hearing from other game developers that when even before the Next Fest demo was playable, even though it was playable that day, but like when the demo came out and when the trailer came out, I have been told by multiple developers now that they've taken this back to their publishers and said, hey, this is something people are really excited about. We want to use it to do our own take on this. And that they're getting approval to do more efficient takes on storytelling that work for their games. That's what brings my heart eternal joy.
Knowing your games are actually making an impact to other studios' projects.
Yeah, we not only do we get to make a really cool, very stylish thing, we were right. I'll say I was right about that one. But that solution gives other developers the freedom to say, what actually makes the player's experience better? In Ace Combat 7, it's a JPEG of a dog. We don't have the time, budget. We can put that into more cool-ass planes flying at Mach 10. So we put it so we can just have a JPEG of a dog, and it makes people happy. It looks
the littlest thing,
wild as hell.
Yeah.
Giving other people the internal permission even to say what makes the player's experience better, that's what makes my day, and that's what makes me excited about I'm Your Beast, because it's filled with that. And I can't wait for people to play it and to either have their day get made or to find a path for their own creativity in the things that we chose.
I'm Your Beast is on PC via Steam August 15th. It launches in November on iOS, so you can even play it on the go. So make sure you get your wish lists in now. Again, August 15th. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you so much for having me.